I became particularly aware of the German danger when I was in Upice visiting Herbert, and we listened to Hitler on the radio, and he was ranting against the Czechs.
Ohne sie zu fragen, kurzerhand zwang, die in Versailles fabrizierte Konstruktion hinzunehmen und sich in sie zu fügen.
It was clear that he was hoping to attack the Czechs, but at the same time we also thought that we were going to repel him because we had these wonderful fortifications on the German border, which incidentally the French had helped us build, and which we were convinced were going to stop the German army should they ever attempt to invade Czechoslovakia. And by the way, we now know that the German generals were also aware of the fortifications and were advising Hitler that it might not be a good idea to invade. But of course we didn't know that at the time, but we did know that the fortifications might be a powerful repellent. So at the time that I was visiting Herbert in Upice, the Czechs were mobilizing already because there had been a meeting between Hitler and Chamberlain, and that first meeting had apparently led to some sort of tentative agreement, but the second meeting, which must have been at the time that I was in Upice, Chamberlain came back from seeing Hitler in a place called Gottersburg, I happen to remember, and he came back to England and he said, I've got to tell the Czechs that if they want to go ahead and mobilize, they should do so, because there's no way that you can negotiate with a man like Hitler. And so the Czechs did in fact declare a general mobilization, and I remember civilians getting on the train because they were joining their army units, and Czechs were enormously patriotic, and they were convinced that they wanted to fight the Germans. And I remember my father had a German employee in Upice, but a very faithful employee, I might say, who had 3 daughters, and the daughters were all married to Czechs, and so the sons-in-law all left because they'd been mobilized. And this particular employee said to father, a fine mess I'm in. I've got all these women at home and all the men are gone. So the men did in fact join their army units, and it looked like there was going to be some sort of war. But then Chamberlain decided to meet Hitler again, and somehow he persuaded Mussolini and the French Prime Minister Daladier to join him, and together they had another meeting with Hitler, and they cooked up the so-called Munich Agreement, where they agreed that the Czechs should give up the Sudetenland, and the Czechs were not invited to this meeting. It was all these powers who made the decision supposedly on their behalf and supposedly to save the world peace, because Hitler declared that if he was going to get the Sudetenland, that was the last demand he was going to make, that after that he was going to be satisfied. And so Chamberlain came back to England and said that he had secured peace in our time. And during the mobilization, there was a family, a Czech officer, his wife, and 2 sons who were quartered in the castle in Svetla. And one of the boys, who was only about 8 years old, and he became a great admirer of mine, and we were good friends. I showed him around the castle and we had a lot of fun together. And so one time we were looking out the window together, and my mother was walking across the courtyard, and he said to me, "I am told this woman is Jewish." And I said, "Yes, that is my mother. We're all Jewish." And he said, "You too?" And I said, "Yes, me too." And he thought about that for a moment, and then he said, "Well, just don't tell anyone and you'll be okay." Well, after the Munich Agreement, refugees started streaming from the Sudetenland into Czechoslovakia. Some of the refugees obviously were Czechs who were fleeing from the advancing Germans, but some of them were also Germans who were members of the Social Democratic Party, and the Social Democrats were violently anti-Hitler, and they were despised by Hitler. They knew that if Hitler ever got hold of them, they would probably end up in concentration camps. So they left the Sudetenland in a hurry ahead of the Germans, and they came into Czechoslovakia, and quite a number of them were housed in the Svetla castle, because it was one of the places where there was room for refugees. But so I think a few hundred of them, the German ones, came to Svetla, and my parents took pity on them, because the Czechs were not particularly friendly to German refugees. After all, they felt that the Germans had betrayed them. So my parents decided to help out a little bit and to help feed these refugees who didn't have much. And so first thing we knew, a group of English women, I think most of them were Quakers. One was a Miss Warriner, who was a professor at the London School of Economics, and then there was a Miss Rowntree, who was a member of the Rowntree chocolate family. They got to know my parents. Miss Rowntree in particular tried to persuade my father that our family should leave Czechoslovakia, because they said Czechoslovakia was not going to survive for long after the Munich Agreement. But my father absolutely refused. He knew that things were bad, but he said one does not leave a sinking ship. And so Miss Rowntree said to him, "Well, if you absolutely refuse to leave, at least you should allow your daughter to leave Czechoslovakia and to go to school in England." And my parents said, "Well, how can we do that? How can we arrange for her to be admitted to an English school?" And Miss Rowntree said, "Well, I know the headmistress of a school near Bristol, and she has agreed to take in a number of refugees, and I'll see to it that your daughter can go to school there." And that is how I came to leave Czechoslovakia in January 1939. My mother arranged for me to have a few things in my luggage which I could take to England with me, but she made sure that I didn't know about it, so I would not be nervous So one of the things that she packed was an item from my father's collection of miniatures, and she also managed to put in some of the valuable stamps that from my father's stamp collection, and she managed to embroider a satchel for handkerchiefs. We still used handkerchiefs in those days, and in that satchel somehow or other she managed to embroider some of the stamps. At the railway station, when we were leaving, my then boyfriend Daladier had turned up with a bouquet of red roses, and so I hid those roses in the wash basin in my railway compartment. We traveled across Germany. While we were in Germany, I woke up and I saw this guy in a Nazi uniform going through the roses in my wash basin, and I realized that he must be looking for something forbidden that I had hidden in there, but fortunately I had not hidden anything, and so he didn't find anything and he departed. So after we landed in England, we went on to London by train, and that evening my brother John, who was already in England, decided to take me to the theatre, and I thought that sounded like a good idea, particularly since I had been taking English lessons for some time. But that evening I sat through that play all evening and I didn't understand one single word, and I thought to myself, never in my life am I going to understand this language. Following is the letter that my father wrote to me, January 23rd, 1939, the day that I left Czechoslovakia. My dear Sonječka, I have looked at my watch at least 10 times today and thought to myself, now they are in Holland, now they are boarding the boat, and finally now they are within sight of England, and in a few hours you will be in London, where you will receive a royal welcome. How I wish I could be there when you see for the first time the miracle that is called London. Meanwhile, I am terribly lonely along with Mother, who is particularly sad. Perhaps it was fortunate that the platform was so crowded when you left that there was no time for a sentimental parting. Besides, I would not have been able to tell you everything that was on my heart. So may this letter take the place of a sad parting and a happy welcome to your school and the beginning of a new life. I know you will work hard, because you will realize, no doubt, that in these terrible times each of us must endeavor more than ever to do our best. Every day presents us with new problems and uncertainties. But you, my dear Žabičko, will now be somewhat removed from the political arena, and I hope you will be spared those ugly political problems. Whatever these sad times may bring, rest assured that we will always be thinking of our children, because that thought is and will always be our solace. Now I await anxiously your news and your impressions of your school and your teachers. I hope you're in good health and that you will occasionally remember your ever-loving Daladier.